Hey everybody, it's DJ, and I'm actually here in Brooklyn with my really good friend Kyle Weeks. Kyle is currently a product marketing manager at Hello Alfred. And actually, Kyle, I wanted to talk to Kyle today because Kyle has a really interesting story about working in tech, but actually taking quite a different path. He actually went to culinary school, also is a sommelier, hence we have the wine glasses here. Uh, but yeah, but wanted to introduce Kyle. And Kyle, why don't you tell us what you're currently doing at Hello Alfred?
Cool. Thanks for having me, DJ.
Yeah.
At Hello Alfred, I'm a product marketing manager, so I'm working on how Hello Alfred expresses itself and explains itself to the world. At a basic level, Hello Alfred partners with luxury buildings to allow for its residents to have a personal assistant type character, a home manager who comes once a week, can do a number of things like do your groceries, do your laundry, etc. But what's really special in particular is because we have access and the trust from our customers, we can deliver your groceries directly into the fridge. We can do a number of things like over holidays, we did a Christmas tree promotion where in the app you tap
Nice.
it and say, I want a Christmas tree, and you can come home to a home that's completely decked out for the holidays. So really creating the in-home commerce category and doing some interesting things in the space and giving people back time, which we view as the most important commodity of all.
Yeah. Cool. So actually, before we dive further, what are we drinking today? Yeah.
Good question. We are drinking some Chenin Blanc from Anjou, which is in Loire in France. So I bought this without knowing much about it, and it kind of looks like natural wine because it's kind of cloudier and it has a little funk to it.
Nice.
But
Yeah.
I'm glad you like it because it's a bit of a gamble.
Yeah. No, I like it. So I want to just go straight into culinary school. So
Yeah.
just a little brief overview of Kyle's kind of career. So after graduation, first of all, Kyle was a Division I swimmer at Alabama, and then he made his way out to Cupertino and worked at Apple, and then he ended up going to culinary school, completely different path, and then he's now out in Brooklyn at Hello Alfred. And so I wanted to ask, why culinary school? How did this even happen?
Yeah, so I'd been working at Apple for 3 or 4 years and started hosting dinner parties. My first year during my Apple stint, I was in San Francisco, and then the next 3 years I lived in the South Bay. And in the South Bay, there's not as many young folks around, and so my roommates and I decided that we were going to have dinner parties to start meeting new people and realizing there's so many smart, driven people doing interesting things around the area, and we need to be exposing ourselves to more of those people. So we all decided we were going to have these dinner parties where each of the three of us were going to invite people, kind of what we described as on the fringes of our friend group, bring them together, talk about a central topic, and have food present, and eat and have fun. And we created this big blackboard that's like 4 foot by 8 foot, and we bought a big long conference table from a chamber of commerce in San Jose. So we had this dining room that was very DIY, but it served an awesome purpose. And we started realizing that just over just a couple hours of a dining experience, because food was present, like people's walls kind of came down and became so close that if you were to talk about a particular topic with no food there, it would feel forced and it would feel like overly kind of it just wouldn't feel as natural. So I was like starting to think about food as being a really interesting medium. At the same time, there's a lot of food startups that were popping up and getting funded. Chefs were kind of metaphorically coming out from behind the brick wall, and really it was like totally a new era where chefs were becoming tastemakers, not just having your face on a bottle of tomato sauce, but like chefs were starting to really take center stage in some new ways. And I was like, food's interesting, and I've been working on premium consumer electronics, but I don't know if that stuff keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
It's been awesome training grounds, but what if I could apply like what I've learned from tech and do something interesting in food? And I thought a great way to do that would be to go to the ground floor of the food industry and learn culinary school.
So I mean, that's interesting. A lot of people, if they want to work at a food startup, maybe they go apply to a company, but you actually decided, hey, I want to know what it's like to be a chef and actually get that formal training.
Yeah, I think culinary school was something that had just been kind of this fly that had been in my ear for a couple years, and I would swat it away, and then it would come back. And it just kept coming up, and I'd always told myself it was too expensive and took too much time.
Yeah.
And then I wrote those constraints out on a piece of paper and found a 6-month culinary school program and applied to a scholarship to go, which ended up coming through and being a full ride. So once those 2 constraints that I had written down were no longer, then I told myself, like, it's time to go, let's do this.
So going into culinary school, did you know that you wanted to come back into tech, or did you potentially think maybe you actually wanted to be a chef?
I think I did a good job not defining success too early,
Okay.
so I allowed for that possibility to exist. I knew that chefs live a very difficult life. Restaurants are super cutthroat. Margins aren't great. But at the same time, it's like, maybe if I fell in love with it, I fell in love with it, and I was preparing myself mentally for that. But I did think most likely I was going to come out and do something that was somewhere between culinary school and tech. But I thought it was super refreshing to go to the other end of the spectrum and just free fall for a little bit and figure out where I gravitate towards after that, knowing that's a way more intentional ending spot than just plowing down the apple path for another 10 years just because I know it's like a highly coveted place to be.
Yeah. So you were in product marketing at Apple before you left for culinary school, right? And maybe you had some thoughts about potentially exploring something in the culinary world, but you kind of had an inkling that you'd be back in tech.
Yeah.
When you were in culinary school, did you ever fear that you were falling behind your peers?
Yeah. No, it's a totally fair thought, and definitely one that I had multiple times. I had a friend who I started with at Apple or at around the same time in the same group, and I actually had to leave right before our year-end bonuses were coming through too, so even that was like a financially falling behind that I knew just a month later I had X number of dollars that were probably coming my way. And then during that review, like, he got promoted, and so it stung a little bit when I first heard that, where I was like, I was so close to that. But I also think that we live in an era now in which differentiation is so important when it comes to employment. That someone told me that, like, the best product people have, it might have even been you at one time, the best product people have a diverse set of experiences. And so I really tried to keep an open mind as I was learning in the kitchen, like, what are the lessons that are going to serve me outside of the kitchen and make me more interesting. And I think working in a professional kitchen taught me so much about process and efficiency, and just like putting your head down and doing 8 to 10 hours of deep work at a time, which I had never experienced anything close to that in the corporate world. And those sorts of lessons serve me well now that I'm back in tech.
Yeah, just to go further into that, what are maybe just like a couple of lessons that you learned from the kitchen that you think would apply to other people that are working in tech, and also that's something that you continue to use in your actual corporate job?
One of the biggest things chefs will talk about is this concept of mise en place, which means everything in its place. And it is a chef's workflow. So everything from where they put their knife on the table to how they're labeling their ingredients to how they're prepping things. It's a very intentional process, such that when they are in the heat of things, knowing that service is going to be a crazy time and tickets are going to be coming in, and they almost know they're going to be backed up, they've put themselves in the best place possible to deal with that chaos. And it encourages like flow state, and that they don't have to be thinking about where their knife is. They just reach their hand over and it's there, and they can do their best work because everything else kind of fades into the background, and they can focus just on the work. So that's made me think a lot more about workflow in tech, like how am I managing my email? Where is my task management going on? How do I approach meetings? How do I approach everything? Is workflow, and putting in that extra 10% to really be intentional about it compounds over time in terms of time savings and efficiency and effectiveness.
What's maybe like one specific example, whether it's email or to-do list?
Probably the use of OmniFocus for me. It's
Okay.
like my secret weapon.
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone who like uses OmniFocus is obsessed with it. But essentially, OmniFocus is one place where you put all your to-dos. You could forward emails into it. You could do Siri notes that drop into it. It goes into this inbox. The inbox you then go through periodically and sort into projects. You could say pretty much anything with more than one task is a project, and you say, okay, are these a sequential group of tasks, or can they all be done in a parallel pattern? You assign context to them, like, okay, this one I need the internet for, this one I need DJ for.
Got it.
And so, for example, like my boss will, I'll have a one-on-one with her, and then I can just click on the Marcella context and go through all the things I need to go through with her.
Got it.
So it's like my work mise en place in a way.
Got it. Nice, nice. And so you actually, so culinary school was 6 months.
Yeah.
But then you did, it was an extra month of sommelier school?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's 7 months you're getting this training, but now you're starting to think about what's actually next for you to get a job.
Absolutely.
Like, walk us through, as you were just starting that job search, like what were the things that were important to you in looking for your next company?
So I think first that the idea of job searching, what I see a lot and what I almost fell victim to, is people start searching once they're already gone mentally from their current spot.
That is yeah, and you become desperate.
You become desperate, and everything looks shiny, and you're just ready to jump at things, and you're not in a good headspace. It's almost like on the back end of a breakup where just every potential new relationship looks good because it's better than the pit that you're currently in.
Yeah.
So my job search started like as soon as I hit the ground in New York, where I just started networking.
Yeah.
There's a group here called Food Tech Connect, which is a meetup where people who are in the food and or tech communities come together. There's like CPG folks, there's meal kit folks, etc. And just started like getting my name out there and learning.
Yeah.
And I
wanted to ask you, so Kyle's probably one of the best people of just like forming relationships and nurturing them. You know, you move out to New York, maybe you know a handful of people here, but in those specific communities, like related to like food tech, how did you go about like initially reaching out to people and then developing that relationship? And I know like networking is kind of feels like a dirty word, but it's really important.
It is really important, and it can be done really wrong if you're not careful. My advice would be on that to just show curiosity. The people that you're reaching out to because you aspire to be like them or admire their work, like obviously they've been on the other side of that too, being the one reaching out. So my advice to people when they reach out to people is be specific, like make sure they know that it's not just a blanket email that you're sending out. Come with one sort of like specific question. So I'd be like a specific admiration, a specific question, and a specific time asked. Like could we hop on the phone for 20 minutes sometime this week, or get coffee for 30 minutes sometime this week? I can come to you, sort of thing.
Got it.
And just with those things, you eliminate all these barriers to entry or questions that the receiving person might have. So from there, you kind of make a list of like aspirational contacts and allow yourself to remove reality for a bit and be like, who would I want on my like power team of people to know in this particular space? And for me, I first started by looking at the 30 under 30 for the food list this past year, so 2017's list, and I just went down like one by one and would reach out to them. And today's
just cold email, like cold LinkedIn message, or
no, it's whoever. For each we live in this time too where you can find a way to contact someone through LinkedIn, through an Instagram direct message, through guessing their email, and most all the people got back to me and had like really good conversations with them. And I think it's important to leave those conversations too with like, who else do you recommend I talk to? And getting creative yourself about how you could provide value back to them. You might be surprised like who you might know that they could value or they could get benefit from, or something that they're struggling with, that you send them an article on next week and say like, hey, I really enjoyed talking about this, like, check this out. So trying to figure out how you're not just taking but also giving is an important part.
That's so wow. So you really had the forethought to start kind of meeting new people right when you landed in New York, instead of kind of pushing it off as like, hey, I have this pretty intense program coming up. I'll just get through that and then start the job search.
Yeah, and I think it was also powerful to not even be in the position where I could take on a new job.
Yeah.
Obviously, there will come a time in anyone's search where they are eligible for employment, but to say that I'm not talking to you because I want a job,
Yeah.
that shows that it changes the conversation a little bit, and that it doesn't feel like an interview. And then you plant that seed where you can get to know the person, and maybe revisit a few months later when you are in that position and say like, hey, I've been keeping up with you, and it's that second touch or third touch where you say like, what type of are you guys hiring right now, etc.
Nice.
In the meantime, just growing your network. These networks are small. They're small and closely held, and the whole time I thought about like my luck surface area that I knew that I just needed to be expanding that, not necessarily knowing how it would help, but knowing that later I would thank myself for doing upfront work.
Okay. Yeah. So that's like amazing advice. Like that luck surface area. I like that concept. And so you're meeting these contacts and you're going through culinary school, and then I just want to know, like, how did you end up at Hello Alfred, right?
Yeah.
From, being in the kitchens, and then now you're at a corporate desk.
Right.
How did that happen?
My day-to-day, if I had just taken snapshots throughout that, year, it would have been so different because, for 4 months I was in a culinary classroom, and then 2 months I was working in a Michelin star restaurant, and then a couple months I was like studying wine, and it was like very like flashcard heavy and stuff. Yeah. And the whole time I was talking to different folks that were in the fine dining space or the CPG space or the food tech space. I mean, there's lots of like kind of surrounding areas of that, and just never found, I thought I was going to do something like directly having to do with food or wine, and never just found a fit. I mean, I talked to like 20 or 30 companies in that space and had like a spreadsheet that I put together an Airtable, and I would track like where people were, and I would send it out to people like you too. When someone's like, "Hey, how's the job hunt?" I would just send them the database and be like, or the spreadsheet, and be like, "Hey, what do you think about this? Like, I want another pair of eyes. Here's where I am in all these conversations. What do you think is a good opportunity? What's not?" And I think what ended up happening, if I remember, is I had a keyword set up against the word hospitality on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And Hello Alfred considers themselves an in-home hospitality company. Yeah. So then that popped up, and I realized that I had heard of them before because they won TechCrunch Disrupt in 2014, and had like kept up with them through a number of like press pieces. And ended up having a product manager friend at Apple who went to HBS with the co-founders and asked for an introduction that way. So it was very unlikely, but then once I was there, I realized how much what they were doing mapped directly to culinary. Everything I had learned about service and delivering upon people's expectations and creating an experience. Because that really is the shift that's happened in food, where it used to be dinner and a movie, and now it's just dinner. Where like dinner is supposed to be experiential, and the plates come out and they're beautiful, and like you're catered on and you're exploring with people. That very much ties into what Alfred's doing in terms of in-home experience, and then the sommelier piece too. Of somms have like such a hard job to make something that's so unfamiliar, which is a wine menu, and make it comfortable and like storytell through that, and allow people's walls to come down and really get to like what they really want, and make them feel comfortable throughout that, not just like selling at them and pushing them or being condescending or shoving knowledge down their throat. And I think Alfred's gonna be doing that too, in the way that they bring products and experiences into people's lives in a very like a very natural sort of way.
So you mentioned one thing that I want to go back to. So you set up this alert for hospitality, and Hello Alfred comes up. Was it like just like a job posting that came up, or was it just like the company news that came up?
Yeah, it was a job posting for a product manager role.
Okay, and so what you said that you knew a friend at Apple who knew one of the founders. Yeah. This just talk about like getting referrals and making sure. Not only just to get your application in, but just to learn more about the company to see if it fit for you. What are kind of the tactical steps you took to kind of make that connection that you knew a contact at Alfred, and then actually asking for that refer or that contact to be connected.
Yeah, for sure. Well, LinkedIn is just such a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone in the job search, like I recommend paying for that premium LinkedIn at least for a couple months as you're in that stage.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw that, and it wasn't even someone I worked very, very close with at Apple.
Mm-hmm.
I just we had known of each other and worked together a couple times. I first made it kind of a check-in with her to be like, how are things, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's important too, instead of just like leading with the ask and being too abrupt.
Yeah.
Because she had just shifted jobs too, so it was a natural talking point as to like, how's it going at this new company. And then it was luck, like back to luck surface area. It was luck that she ended up being very, very close friends with the founder as well at business school. But it took me initially asking for her to, share that, and for me to realize like, oh, this could be a slam dunk introduction.
Yeah.
But I would say that in terms of like meeting people and expanding your network, kind of earlier what we were talking about, it's important to be planting seeds, not just like right next to your network, but on the far reaches in new networks.
Yeah.
If you could think of like, a system of connectors, it's more, you don't want everyone to know each other. Like you also want some people on the outskirts that are more likely to expose you to other people. Throughout the food tech job search, it was amazing just the number of people that I had talked to like the last 6 months who are now being people who could connect me to these people that I wanted to get at. But if I hadn't met them first, I would have never met the people that I wanted to be connected to.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a really great lesson, especially just that, meeting all different types of people where it's not just concentrated into one area. And so you get, this contact, you check in, make sure, just reaching out, just being an actual human and not just saying like, hey, give me this. And so you end up finding out that your contact at Apple is good friends with the founder at Hello Alfred. Yeah. And then so you ask for an introduction to the founder. So what was that like? You asked, maybe you get email connected, and then how did you think about approaching a conversation with the founder when you were, interested in, getting a job, and obviously she has, the authority to give you a job. So tell me how you approach that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a slow play because, especially in a startup when it's such few people, cultural fit matters so much. Yeah. And a warm introduction should be seen as a way to increase your chances at an at-bat. By no means are you done at that point, which I see a lot of people who think like, oh, I've had the intro, and then they kind of let their guard down and don't approach the rest of the interview process as seriously because they think they're already in, and that shows entitlement. Yeah. So I viewed that introduction as being like super beneficial, that I could get on their radar and then realize like I still have so much to prove. And then she came back in the email and said like, very nice to meet you, like we'll get you connected with the team, and then talk to their head of talent. And it wasn't until 3 or 4 other interviews had occurred that I got to talk to her directly. So that's sometimes how it works.
Yeah. Did you have, when you were connected with the founder, did you have a specific ask? Did you just say, hey, I'm interested in this role? Like, who would be the right person to talk to?
Yeah, I had asked the person who introduced me to include a snippet sharing what I was interested in and a brief background, like just enough to be interesting enough to put on their radar. So it was about my time at Apple, and then a little bit of a risk because I wasn't sure how it would be received, but a little bit of the stuff about Culinary School and sommelier. And I view that stuff, especially early on, as just being enough to get the first date. Yeah. Where a lot of people, when they apply, they want to introduce themselves and propose in the same sentence. Yeah. And that rarely works.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to also just having sort of been in this job search for a long time, where you're not so desperate. Yeah. And you're kind of being systematic and intentional about what you're going after and how you're going after it.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to see a lot of opportunities to recognize one that's really great. because if you just see 2 or 3 opportunities, you're really comparing them against themselves, but they could all be bad.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, this is less bad.
Yeah.
But in your mind, you're thinking it's good.
Yeah.
And so I had a list of priorities or things that I was looking for that I got to check off during the interview process too. So I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me, which is really how you want it. And it had been because I had seen some things that were lacking in the previous companies that I talked to that I wanted to pressure test this time around.
Got it. And tell me more about the interview process. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, where you kind of didn't know how your culinary school and sommelier background was going to come out.
Right.
Obviously, I assume that came up in your interview process. Like, how did you, what is sort of the story how did you kind of package that experience up to be relevant to the roles that you were going after?
Yeah, so the other thing is I had applied to a product manager role, but ended up through the interview process they realized and I realized too that it would be a better fit for me to be a product marketing manager.
Got it. Okay.
It was a role that they hadn't posted yet.
Yeah.
But when they realized that I had Apple product marketing and product management were one and the same for the hardware team, and I kind of naturally probably would have done product marketing had they been separate entities. But that's another thing that I want to briefly bring up is that a lot of jobs go unposted, and so it's like you have to present yourself for them to think about you. If someone really wants you, they'll create the role for you. So don't feel like if you don't see that perfect role that it's not worth reaching out. A lot of startups now have sort of a name your superpower type of general application, which isn't just fluff. It really is real. To your question, I kind of felt it out because I think there's sort of this new world, old world way of thinking about stuff like that. For example, when someone goes and travels for 6 months, there's a way to look at that. I think if I was hiring someone, I could either see that and say they're unfocused or they're, what a typical millennial going to do that and running away from reality. Or I could say, I wonder what type of things they were learning during that time and how those learnings can pull into what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And thankfully, my time in culinary school and with Som School were more like the latter, and that people really understood the value that it provided, but I had to intentionally tell a story around that.
Yeah.
So it was similar to what we talked about earlier about the lessons that were learned. So I really think that being in culinary school and me being a line cook for a couple months helped me be better at process and quality control and workflow. And me being a som helped me be a better storyteller and notice more. Blind tasting wine is all about noticing what's in the glass and what the wine has to say.
Yeah.
And it's helped me be a much better listener too. And so those sorts of things stick with someone when you say it in an interview. Even when someone has a resume and at the end they list some interests skydiving or whatever, I think those things are important to differentiate you as a person, but they should all play into your story and why that makes you a stronger candidate for this position.
Yeah. I'm just curious, did you while you were going through the interview process, did you specifically try to call out these skills in the interviews about culinary or som school?
Yeah, I would put it out there and kind of see if the person bid at it and then decide whether to double down on it or not.
Give us a scenario.
Okay, so a scenario would be oh, what have you been up to the last six months or whatever? Because obviously there's a gap in the resume that shows that I've been at culinary school. Yeah. And if I began to talk about culinary school and just physically saw them starting to get more interested,
got it.
Food's a very common denominator of people. Yeah. So oftentimes people are going to be interested in food, but then it's what is the context of their interest? Are they interested just because they like restaurants and think they watch Top Chef, or are they interested because they're biting at the story you're telling about how that makes you a potential better product manager or product marketing manager. So it's back to listening, I think.
Yeah. And so throughout the interview process, you mentioned that you're going after the product manager role, and then kind of on both sides found that maybe product marketing was a better fit. Yeah. How did that happen, and how did you feel just for that to come up and for that to change course?
I think there's one particular interview question that was asked by a product team member that was like, how much time have you spent working with engineers? And I realized it was like, not a lot,
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
pretty open about that.
Yeah.
I'd worked with a data engineering team, but it wasn't an engineering team that was making consumer facing product, which is like very different.
Yeah.
And so I was open in that, and I said, here's what my experience is, and here's a number of other things that I think could help offset that gap. Like, for example, I've done coding boot camps. Like, I know this and this language. Like, I've done wireframing, whatever.
Yeah.
And just give myself the best shot at filling that gap, but also being transparent and acknowledging it as a gap, which I think shows confidence too. And it was well received, but it wasn't like, okay, that's good enough for this particular role.
Got it.
And so when it came back that, hey, we really, really like you, but we think this other role might even be better for you.
Yeah.
It was a natural, like, kind of twinge of ego that was like, you don't even know how good I could be at that.
Sure, yeah.
But it was allowing myself to be open to change, and this is a much, much better fit. So I'm glad that I didn't allow that ego to get the best of me.
Yeah. Yeah, so Kyle, there's a lot of people who end up taking breaks, whether to travel or maybe they pursue something else like you did for culinary school. What advice would you give for people who are wanting to kind of get back into corporate world after they've taken some time off?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is really think hard about what your story is, your why behind taking that time off. And sometimes you'll know that before you take the time off, and other times it won't be apparent until after you've done so.
Yeah.
But be prepared to talk about how that experience was more than just a vacation for you.
Yeah.
And if done the right way, it really can be a differentiating factor when you go to apply for the same job as someone else, and maybe you've had these life experiences that they haven't. Be ready to package that up as a value add to the company. The other thing I would say is, you can, if you're about to take off on one of those sorts of journeys, like, you can be intentional up front about your why. Even doing some journaling as to what you're hoping to get out of the time, and constantly checking in on that is super, super helpful. And really just making it, I think there's a big difference between running to something and running from something.
Yeah.
I see a lot of times the time off that people want to take is because they're so unhappy in their jobs. They just want to get a break from it and get relief. And getting relief is very different than like wanting to pursue something and put time towards it. So be careful not to just go take time off to get away from something else.
And what were some of the whys in your mind as far as pursuing culinary school?
Yeah. Well, I thought for some reason it was just, it kept coming up, as I mentioned, in my head, as to being like, wouldn't it be cool to know this? I think in terms of knowing about food, there's this sort of step function where you can learn a lot online. You can learn from your local Williams-Sonoma or Sur La Table that's doing classes here and there. But then it's like there's no real middle ground between that and culinary school. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to just go to culinary school in New York City and have that, and be able to say that about myself for the rest of my life?
Sure.
And that was a big why. There was also this like ultra practical, well, if worst comes to worst, I can learn how to like cook better for myself, or maybe become, I don't know, slightly more confident or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think there's just like this really, really pure curiosity too. Like, what is that world like? It gets romanticized in media, and like, what does it take to have the discipline of a chef? And there was certain things about like the ethos of the kitchen and the chef that I really related to before even knowing more about it. So those were some whys.
Got it. And then when you were actually interviewing, kind of like, what were some of the things that you kind of actively like presented that experience as far as like how you mentioned about just differentiating yourself, right? Just getting a job is very competitive. Like, how did you just not just the fact that you went to culinary school, but how did you actually make that into a kind of like a true differentiator to help you actually get the job that you wanted? Yeah,
I think with that, it's always important to put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer and say, what are they looking for? Like, what type of things would they want out of the person? And then back your story into that. So for example, when I talk to CPG companies that make food products that are on the shelves at Whole Foods, I would talk about culinary school in terms of really deepening my appreciation and understanding of flavor and taste.
Yep.
Because they're like, oh, that's an added benefit for this guy who could maybe go do marketing stuff for us, but really help us with R&D stuff as kind of a hidden superpower that he knows what's going on in these trends, where oftentimes too, I'll note that food trends sometimes start in like super fine dining establishments, and then they trickle down to more mass market stuff. So like I would tell that story to that group of people. In a job that, as an example, like if I were wanting to do something that was a little bit more methodical and more routine, then I could easily translate how being a line cook prepared me for that. It's really just like seeing experiences as amassing tools on your tool belt and getting creative about how you explain those tools and how do you apply them to someone's need.
Yeah, got it. So Hello Alfred is a startup with about 50 people, and you're at Apple, the world's largest, market cap, world's largest company.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was pretty different experiences. And there's a lot of folks who are interested in going to a smaller company and going to startups. Just like compare just the experience of actually working at Apple versus working at a smaller company like Hello Alfred.
Yeah. I was thankful to kind of have a gap in between there too, and that I left Apple to actually go to a startup accelerator for 3 months. That happened actually before culinary school, and my reason for doing that is because I realized that Apple represented one end of the spectrum, and this accelerator was particularly interesting to me because it was such a wide variety of companies in terms of size. So the earliest company there was pre-product, and the farthest closed to Series B during the accelerator. So accelerator might even be the wrong word for what it was, but I wanted to start identifying like what are the different archetypes of companies in terms of growth stages and even founder types, like what does the mad scientist look like versus the best friends versus the whatever, and where do I best fit? Where do I add the most value? And which of those skills that I learned in like Fortune 100 land are going to transfer into each of those stages? So that was really helpful, and I realized that I kind of fit in this like post Series A, like has a team that's probably in the tens, but not quite like 100 people yet, where it's still very like an autonomous environment, to your question. So let me back up and say, like Apple, there's so many people there that usually there are very specific roles that people have, because you have that structure. Apple has the ability to recruit like the world's best and point players who do specific things. In a startup, it's more like you almost recruit for competency, and if you bring someone in who's too specific too early, then they won't be useful enough. But as the company grows, people's roles kind of like narrow, and people begin to dial in on particular roles and responsibilities. So I thought about it in terms of like how broad did I want to be versus how narrow did I want to be.
Interesting.
And it's hard to like kind of put a number against or quantify, but it's like I want a team that's beginning to fall more into specific roles that are narrow but not quite there, like still pretty malleable, so I can have an influence there. And that's what I felt Alfred was, like great structure, great group of people, all really smart, definitely like had things that they're specifically responsible for, but still enough like playground to go take on new things, add new responsibilities, which also existed at the group I was in Apple, where I was like, it was in a very flat organization. That's part of what kept me there for so long. It was like that ability to really self-manage if you gain the trust.
Got it.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And so those are some of the kind of the differences while you're at the company. Did you feel like the recruiting process was different than kind of dealing with like a much bigger company versus a much smaller company?
Yeah. My recruiting process at Apple was a little bit atypical in that I came in through an internship program that had like a specific program manager who really facilitated the interviewing of everyone. Sure. But I do understand with bigger companies like Apple, there is a big, HR function, and so there's going to be a lot of process behind how you're brought in, who you talk to, the way reference checks are done. Startups may or may not have someone who's dedicated to recruiting, depending on what size they are. And so my advice with getting interviewed by a startup is just go with the flow. And if you're stuck waiting for a long time, just be patient, because everyone just has so much to do, which is also true of big companies too. But be that like persistent, gentle but firm nudge as you're working your way through the ranks. Know that in a startup, word travels so much faster just because there's such few people. And I would almost say that having a recommendation going into a startup, like a warm intro, might actually carry more weight because it's like a smaller team, and so it means more. And culture fit matters even more, in my opinion, in a startup, because there are such few people that if you're a team of 5 and you bring in, if you're a team of 4 and you bring in one person who's off, then all of a sudden 20% of your team like doesn't fit, and it's a bigger impact on the business. So the best startups I've seen hire very carefully, and they don't hire too quickly, which is always tough to balance, like growth versus like slow growth, right?
And so actually culture fit is one of those things where it's kind of like hard to really define. And you know, we talk about that a lot at Dropbox as well. But when you were an applicant, like how did you sort of evaluate if that company was a culture fit for you?
That's a really good question. So I think one of the easiest ways for me to gauge that is, are these people that I'd want to hang out with outside of work, which is pretty cliche, and I'm not inventing anything new there, but I think it does definitely hold weight. And you can get that from someone just by an interview. Sometimes someone will interview you and kind of not let their personality show, but in the interviews that I was going through, I just realized through the intentionality of the questions and how like playful people were, and curious and smart and thoughtful. It's like, this is a place I want to be, and I want to be a part of this. I think culture fit, it's oftentimes, you're always being assessed against it as someone who's being interviewed, but not often are people who are being interviewed assessing that of their interviewers, which should happen more often. Like, notice the little things that are little red, maybe not red flags, but like orange flags, and see if you see patterns between the 4 or 5 people that you interview.
Cool. All right. Well, Kyle, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Some super impactful insights there, and hopefully I'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, of course.